listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
You got a sneaky smile on your face. What's up?
I was just thinking about what I'm going to talk about as my banter this week, and a little bit of kind of how we make the sausage here at the Identity at the Center podcast is, we go through a pre-show kind of checklist to make sure the audio is great, and I think I've teased you a little bit on past episodes about your attention to detail in terms of audio quality. I was just thinking, my chair is so squeaky today, I could probably invent a language based on chair squeaks.
We know what you're going to say just based on the chair squeaks and saying, "Oh, here comes a pearl of wisdom from Jim."
Yeah, he's getting really excited. Because I just heard like 4 or 5 squeaks. But it actually reminded me a lot of our space of identity and access management and all the alphabet soup, and it's just you can speak in nothing but acronyms and complete a full sentence. And we've got a new acronym today that I never heard before, CIEM, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. So that should be some exciting knowledge to share.
Thrill a minute, as identity and access management always is. I think people, if you're listening to this, you're probably, on the edge of your seat wondering, what the heck are Jim and Jeff going to bring to the table this week? And, it's going to be just a thrill ride, a roller coaster of IAM emotions. How about that?
I love it. And I think when you get into kind of our news and notes update, people will see why if they're not already on the edge of their seat, then I think they'll be after that.
Yeah, so why don't we get to some news and notes before we get to our topic and our guest for today. Today, so when this show goes live for the first time, it'll be June 21st, which is also the first day of Identiverse taking place in Denver. So that's kind of cool. We're also approaching episode 100. This should be episode 98. That's also very cool, 100 episodes in. And I think that coincides really with our 2-year kind of anniversary. So we started this July 3rd, 2019, way back when. And our 100th episode should be live, I believe it'll be July 5th, which is kind of cool, actually, if you think about it. I think we've lasted a long time, and maybe it's stubbornness on our part, but we've kind of pushed through and made it this far, which is pretty neat.
I think if we ever get to 500 episodes, that'll mean we've been doing this for 10 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that's quite the commitment. I think, even just doing anything right is, this long is probably commitment. So hats off to the folks who are putting out content, on that routine basis and get that far. I think, most folks don't ever make it that far. They maybe do a couple and then they're kind of done. I was listening to someone on YouTube who does a lot of podcast setups and things like that, just so, I can educate myself on how do we make this better, right, for people who are listening. And he said, and this was Tom Buck, by the way, he's like a video YouTuber type person. And he mentioned that if you have more than 28 downloads on your first day of a podcast, you are in the top 50% of all podcasts, which I found crazy, right? And you don't think of 28 as very much, okay, we only have 28 listeners. Well, if all 28 are downloading and they're consistent and it's, on the first day, that's a pretty neat stat. And I can tell you right now, we definitely blow that away for sure. So part of that is, the guests and the topics and, our listeners who are very consistent and listen to most of our episodes. So thank you to all the listeners out there that have stuck with us. And if you've just recently joined us and you want a good laugh, go back to our earlier episodes when we didn't really know as much of what we're doing. Still don't, but those are even rawer than they are, I think, today. Maybe you want to talk about some of the upcoming guests we've got coming up, Jim, kind of tease some of our future episodes.
Sure. We've got Julie Smith from IDSA making her 3rd appearance, which will make her the current record holder, right?
The reigning champ.
She'll be the reigning champ. The IDSA is publishing some new research. To celebrate episode 100, we're bringing Victor Barris onto the show. He's never appeared on the show. He was co-founder of Identropy, which is the company that employed you and I for many, many years. His other co-founder, Ash Matawala, was on the show, I think, episode less than 10. I don't remember the exact episode number, but we'll have Victor on for episode 100 to kind of round things out. We had Jerry Gable on from Strata.io talking about identity orchestration, and Rod Simmons on from Omada. So I say we had those guys because we already recorded those episodes because we wanted to make sure that we stick to our every week publishing schedule, even though we've got some vacation lined up in July and we're out different weeks. So we wanted to make sure that we don't have an interruption in the publishing. So hopefully that'll keep everyone entertained during their summer. If you're looking for something to do when you're laying on the beach, you've always got identity at the center to turn to.
Yeah, speaking of beach, I'm making my first real trip, I guess, since the pandemic kind of started. I've been shut down for the last 15 months, but I'm going to Key West for an entire week for a wedding celebration party, kind of in advance of the wedding. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. So yeah, we recorded a couple things earlier just so that I wouldn't have to lug around my gear or have to worry about trying to work and edit a podcast and record a podcast and all that stuff while I'm also trying to ignore the sweet calling of the beach and maybe a beverage or two.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, but I squeaked my chair several times for you.
I'm sure I'll hear it. All right. Well, why don't we get into our main topic for today, which is identity first security. And we're going to talk about that and a few other things. And we've invited Gal Diskin. He's the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder at Authomize, which you can find on the web at AUTHOMIZE.com, Authomize.com. Welcome to the show, Gal.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. And congratulations, guys, for closing in on the milestone of 100 episodes.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's pretty exciting. We're still learning, but it's still fun. So we'll keep doing it. So you've been in the identity and the security space for quite a while, and I think one of the things as a listeners probably know by this point is we like to find out the origin story for the folks that we have on the show and kind of learn how did they get into this. How did you get into the security and in the identity space? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
So that's a hard question. I think probably security chose me. Starting from a very young age, I was what you would probably call a hacker, even involved with some hacking groups as a kid. And then at 13, I started studying in the Open University, computer science, and I've been working in security since then. I also spoke in various conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON and Chaos Communication Congress about my research. And it's always been for me about securing organizations. I worked for Intel on trusted execution environments and securing the interface of the software with the processor. Then I worked for Palo Alto Networks and Saver, a startup in the areas of developing secure endpoint security and preventing ransomware and so on. And then I worked on cloud with Palo Alto Networks, and that brought me into blockchain and Authomize that we do today. So authorization is always the holy grail for me, and IAM is the core of it.
So you could say identity is at the center. Zing. You've also founded two companies or helped co-found I guess two companies, Hexponent and Authomize. I guess I'm curious, what's it like to start an identity or a security company? Are there things that you learned from starting previous companies that have helped kind of inform how you might want to operate future companies like Authomize that you've helped co-found as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I tried to found a company when I was in my early 20s, and this didn't work well. But it was the best learning experience I had, because it taught me about the importance of not just technology, but business and product management. These lessons brought me to learn a lot more about this. And it affected how I founded the future companies. I also joined the company as a sort of a junior partner initially to gain more experience in being a founder. And yeah, it's a process, and being a founder is a profession.
So, Gal, one thing that I've noticed that you guys just got put into Gartner's Cool Vendor analysis for identity first security, and I think that's what we're calling this episode is around identity first security. That document was just published this month, so if you have a Gartner subscription, you can go out there and read it and see Authomize and other vendors that were put in that space. But I was wondering if you could just kind of describe what identity first security is, and second, kind of go through, just explain to us what it was like going through the process with Gartner in terms of being considered, and then how did it feel to be selected?
Okay, so first of all, it's a real honor to be selected. I think this is like a very necessary milestone for startups to get to when you start any new area, is the recognition from prominent analysts like Gartner. And it takes, the process is very interesting because you go out and you start working on your company and you start talking to analysts in Gartner. And you get like 30 minutes talking to different analysts and telling them about your company. And, they hear about your company and they hear about 100 other companies every week, and they talk to the big players, and the big players tell them, we're doing everything. These small players are not needed. So it's always about how do you explain to the analysts why are you special and why are you actually able to do what you're doing, because there is also a certain level of doubt initially when you talk to a startup. And we've gone through this process multiple times, tens of briefings to analysts. And at some point, when they start to be interested and they start hearing about you from other Gartner customers, they start getting more interested and more into it. And then you start letting them talk to your customers, and you need to convince also your customers to be willing to talk to Gartner. And that's the point where Gartner is sort of doing a due diligence about everything you said and comparing what your customer is telling about you to what you told them about your company. And if everything works out and Gartner thinks that what you're doing is going to be useful and cool and has traction, and so they might select you as a cool vendor. I really recommend other founders to take the time and put in an effort into briefing the analysts, because they know a lot about the industry and they can help you.
So when they put together this grouping called Identity First Security, it sounds a lot to me like Zero Trust, being that identity is the first vector. In other words, identity at the center. It's the second thing of the show. What is Identity First Security?
The way I understand it, it is similar to what you've said. In principle, identity first security is about applying the principles of zero trust to the IAM plane of defense, right? Doing zero trust in IAM. And I think it breaks down, as most of IAM, into the two classic components of authentication and authorization. And you also see this in the identity first security cool vendors. Two of them are more focused on the authentication side of things, and two of them, including Authomize, are more focused on the authorization side of things. And I think the authorization companies in identity first security, and this is something we've been talking to analysts, and it's not yet another acronym, but it's heading there, is around IDSM, or Identity Security Management. And this is sort of something that is starting to build up, and a category that I think will exist. And I think it's more interesting to talk about what defines it, because in a sense, even if we all go to that vacation on the beach and have fun, I think this category will exist eventually.
I think of kind of like, if you're in the running for this cool vendor, well, first of all, I think it's terrifying that Gartner is an arbiter of cool. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it is cool to be part of it, right? What is the kind of impact that being on that kind of list gives you, I guess, what is, there's a certain cachet, right, to be part of a major analyst firm and saying you've won this award. Were you sitting by the phone at night waiting for the Oscar nomination or the cool award nomination to kind of come through? How do you celebrate that kind of thing?
I think it begins with you're just trying to brief Gartner, and you don't even know that they're going to define this category of identity first security and decide who that you're part of it, right? Or that you're even in the running. But at some point, Gartner told us that we are going to probably publish a report that will include you as a cool vendor, and this is awesome. And we are not going to tell you exactly when, but it's going to be soon, and this is sort of where we are.
So it just comes like kind of out of the blue, and then next thing you know, you're reaching into that cooler behind you, grabbing your favorite scotch or whiskey to kind of celebrate. You're with Authomize now, obviously, and we don't normally do like commercials, right, for vendors or anything like that. But I think it's interesting to kind of talk about, what Authomize is, because I look at the website and I see the tagline, the first automated authorization management solution. So in simple terms, I guess, what does Authomize do?
Okay, simple terms. So I think the simplest is Authomize helps you get the right people, the right access at the right time, which is sort of saying IAM or authorization. So I think maybe it deserves going a bit deeper. I think it also defines what IDSM is, which is regardless of Authomize, what's going to happen, I think, in our market.
So having kind of this, spider web of entitlements and permissions is always something that a lot of companies kind of struggle with, especially if they are multi-cloud or, multiple on-prem apps and things like that. At a high level, how does the product work? Is it looking for entitlements and authorizations within each of those environments and then stitching it together somehow to come up with kind of a who has access to what? And then I guess where does it go from there?
Pretty much like that. We connect to our product to different products that your organization buys. For example, SaaS solutions, IaaS solutions like AWS, and so on. And we bring in the information about the entitlements, the assets, the identities, and even the activities. How are people using those permissions that they have? And we put all this, normalize this into one representation of all the different authorization systems. And God knows there are too many. And seriously, and what AWS did with their authorization and permission system, this should be listed as a crime against humanity, in my opinion. But we bring in everything. We normalize it into one representation that includes the usage. So we can map your activity to the entitlement that enabled it. And this means you have to be really granular. You have to understand the smallest assets that a user can act on, so you can make this create this context. And then we continuously monitor the changes and the activities to provide you with an ongoing map and controls around the changes in your authorization. And we automate the processes around getting this under control. And this, of course, applies to all identities, whether they're robotic or human.
So where would a product like this fit into an IAM program and the other technologies or capabilities might have? So things like privilege access management or identity governance or access management. So let's say I'm an organization, I already have CyberArk, I already have SailPoint, I already have Okta. Where do you see Authomize and this type of collation of identity and entitlement data coming in and either enriching or augmenting or, working in conjunction with some of these other tools? Or does it replace some of the functionality of those other tools?
So I think Authomize is solving the problem somewhat differently, but we are offering you capabilities that can, in some cases, replace your IGA or PAM solution. We're not aiming to replace your SSO or authentication. We believe that this is part of the authentication layer where we're focusing on the authorization layer. But this is part of our capabilities, as well as naturally identity analytics and providing you with very powerful tools to manage your SaaS applications and cloud applications in general, which the traditional platforms tend to be less efficient for.
You mentioned the privilege chaining of robotic identities or robot accounts. And that, I believe, is the topic you're going to speak about at Identiverse this week, or the week that this episode will be airing. Can you educate us a little bit on what that's all about?
Yeah, definitely. So this is actually research that I've been working on together with Avi, who leads the data science at Authomize. And we've been looking at the usage of robotic identities initially. So when I say robotic identity, it's like a general term for non-human identities. And it breaks down roughly into three types, right? We have the classic service accounts. We have user accounts used as service accounts or for robotic process automation type of purposes. And we have applications that are connected into our platform and acting within it, right? So, and those are replicative identities. And all of those are acting within your environment, right? We're touching your data, making changes, reading data, moving data, and so on. And as we've started looking at what they do and how they do it, we found several interesting things. And we've been actually having controls around these type of accounts in Authomize from the get-go. And then the SolarWinds attack was published. And it sort of highlighted the things that we've been looking at. These accounts provide you as an attacker, and I'm speaking here now from my hacker background. They are persistent. It means that if you ever hack this type of account, it's unlikely that anyone will change a password, change an access key, revoke your access in any way. They are usually privileged. For example, we've been monitoring that across all our customers and companies that have worked with us in the past. And 30% of these accounts have administrative privileges. And this is even before we start talking about, business privilege type of privileged accounts. And they are unmonitored. Nobody's monitoring them, which is one of the biggest attractions for an attacker, right? And lastly, you can hide the actual access they have via what we call chaining. And this is the really, really cool part, I think.
It seems to me that with all the attention on ransomware right now, I mean, I think what you're talking about is the anatomy of the attack, right? You get in, however you get in, right? It could be through a very non-powerful human account. And then if you can gain access to a privileged account, which may be very powerful, but probably has been excluded from some of the security controls of the organization, like frequent password changing. Perhaps the account was even created when the password policy was extremely weak, but everybody's too afraid to change the password on a service account because we don't even know how it's been used. And so they become weak points within the organization. And I think, smart organizations start a program to manage service accounts with the technology like Jeff mentioned, CyberArk. But even for organizations, at some point, you're implementing this technology, but you have a boatload of service accounts that are already in use. So it takes a lot of time to pull them all in and manage passwords. So definitely can see how they can become a weak point, and we'll definitely be interested to check out your talk about that.
And I would say nobody is managing the life cycle of these accounts as well. So you end up in a company and nobody knows who owns the service account. Is it actually in use? And can I delete it, right? Or even change the password, forget deleting.
So Gal, you mentioned SolarWinds, and that's actually the way that I found out about your companies. You guys maintain a really good blog. And when I say it's really good, it's that I see a lot of technology vendors. I read a lot of blog articles, and a lot of them are just, you know, here's a big 5-page advertisement about our company, and yours really, I'd say 2/3 of your blog article is kind of independent and it's meant more to educate the reader. And so I enjoyed that. But you had a blog article on the supply chain hack, you know, specific to SolarWinds, but you kind of like gave a little historical perspective of supply chain. But so that was one that I would direct our readers to go out and check out the Authomize blog, read the SolarWinds blog. But there was another one that I wanted you to maybe talk about, which was what I kind of talked about in the beginning in terms of alphabet soup, acronyms that we all speak in. And the new one is CIEM, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, I think this is a space that you're focused on solving or providing a product solution for, but what is cloud infrastructure entitlement management? Why should we care about it?
Yeah, so cloud infrastructure entitlement management is about, and Gartner actually coined the term, and when they coined it, they decided that you need to pronounce it like there is a K at the beginning. So they actually wrote pronounced Kim. So I'll try to pronounce it Kim. And the way when Gartner coined the term, they put it into the hype cycle of IAM and security technologies. And they made an interesting claim there. Their claim is that this is going to be obsolete before it reaches full maturity. And the area that cloud infrastructure entitlement management focuses on is around managing the entitlements in cloud infrastructure vendors like AWS, Azure, GCP. The goal of KIM is, I think personally, that KIM can be summarized into one sentence. You don't use it, you lose it. So that comes down to, if you're not using a certain entitlement in your cloud infrastructure, it should be taken away. I think that this is good for extremely high security environments because it allows you to apply the principle of least privilege there. But when you go to a lesser security environment, so for my production environment, you don't use it, you lose it, makes tons of sense, right? But for my development environment in AWS, my developer needs to try and change the permissions. So I can't actually take away everything because he won't be able to do his work. So I think that KIM is a good approach for high security environments. But when you go to a lower security environment that you don't need to apply, you don't use it, you lose it, it's not enough. And another way that I'm kind of disappointed with the pure KIM approach, which we're trying to take a different mode of thinking, the IDSM in Authomize, is that it doesn't look at across different applications. So it's not enough to look at AWS because the code goes through from GitHub through Jenkins to AWS, right? So this is something that I feel KIM is very cool about getting the cloud infrastructure entitlements right, but it needs the thought needs to be far broader.
Yeah, from reading the blog, I kind of educated myself with that information, but I wanted to point out some of the identity-related security risks that KIM looks to solve for, right? So excessive permissions, misconfigured environments, which we know have kind of been a favorite attack vector for hackers in terms of how they exfiltrate data for some of the larger data breaches, limited visibility, and external data sharing. So can you talk a little bit about how KIM kind of tackles those problems? Is it that it identifies the problems and bubbles them to the surface, making it, giving a dashboard to the the security architect to know these are the areas where I have, you know, I'm not doing principle of least privilege, so excessive permissions, or I have a misconfigured S3 bucket, things like that. Is that so? Can you talk to us a little bit about how Kim kind of works in the real world?
I think Kim begins with getting the information about the entitlements from the product that you're connecting to, AWS, Azure, GCP, and the identities involved there. This is done by fetching the policies and parsing them, and usually using a graph-like representation, which is also very popular in Kim product, that you can get like this person gets access to this asset through this policy and that membership in that group and so on. And so this is how Kim begins. And then Kim looks at the actual access logs to understand the usage. And based on the understanding of the usage, Kim goes and starts making recommendations, right? I understand the privileges that people have or the entitlements that they're assigned to, and I understand the usage of those entitlements, and then I go and I say, if a machine is exposed to the internet, it probably shouldn't be privileged. This is one of the tenets of Kim, right? Another way of thinking of that is, if this person is not using that entitlement, then he should be excluded from that entitlement. So this is, you don't use it, you lose it. So Kim is taking these type of principles, and it's generally creating a stream of events that you as a security architect or a DevSecOps leader are expected to look at and take decisions and modify your environment.
Does this type of scenario allow for firefighter type access? Can you flag an entitlement and say, yeah, nobody's using this, nor should they, right? And either keep it active or keep it part of a profile for access when it's needed, and kind of break glass scenarios. Does that model and that framework account for that type of scenario?
Yeah, I think it does, because the way it works is Kim will recommend that you will remove this entitlement if it's not in use, right? But as you get this recommendation, you can, of course, decide that I don't want to take this recommendation because it's just a recommendation. This is actually part of the thing that is worrying in a sense, because you get tens of recommendations a day. If you can't get to a certain level of automation, this becomes just asking you to hire another person or several people, depending on the size of your environment. But there's definitely the ability to say this is for break glass, or and so on.
So you rely on that institutional knowledge or platform or app knowledge to say, okay, we know why this exists, and at least you have an inventory of it out there, which is part of the first battle that you want to fight, right? You got to know what you have to be able to protect it. So I think that's really interesting. I know that we are running short on time, and I want to make sure that we get to a question that I've been dying to ask you since we started. We want to end on a little bit of a lighter note, and I know that you're a collector of Scotch and or whiskey. What is your favorite bottle of Scotch or whiskey that you have in your collection right now?
I love all of them, but
they're all your children, I know.
Yeah, and I also have two wonderful children, but I love my children almost as much as I love my Bruichladdich Black Art bottle. I have one from the 4th series. It's one of the coolest bottles that I have ever tasted, because what Bruichladdich do is that they are aging the whiskey in 8 different casks. And nobody is doing 8 casks. Some places are doing 1, 2, 8 casks is insane. It's a black art, and this is hence the name.
That is pretty interesting. That is definitely unique, I think, in the world of aging and multiple casks. I had to ask my wife, because she is definitely the expert for us. She does a lot of wine and spirits type of work. And so she told me that, based on our collection we have, she has a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 15, which is very good, I guess. A 4 Roses limited edition small batch from 2016, which is also very good. And then I'm definitely going to butcher this name, but this goes back to the cask one, is Michel Couvrier, Prima Cantillon. It's actually a Scotch or a whiskey that's distilled in Scotland, but it's aged in sherry casks in caves in Burgundy, France. So you're really getting the worldwide treatment there on that one, and that one definitely has a unique kind of approach to it. So that is pretty cool. Have you had any of those, and can you either confirm or deny what my wife has said is good for our collection?
Yeah. So I heard of the first one, but I had only the second one of your list, and it was pretty good. I confirm and support your wife strongly.
She'll be happy to hear that. Jim, what about you? Do you have a favorite Scotch or whiskey, or maybe something else?
Well, I'm an Irishman who lives in the South of the United States, so I should have one. I'm not that big of an alcohol drinker, but so here I'm going to embarrass myself. My favorite Irish is Jameson, and my favorite go-to is Jack Daniels.
I think there's something a lot to be said though. Drink what you like.
That's it. That is right.
Yeah.
I think my wife has done a lot of work in the wine industry, and you get your typical like wine snobs, and the same thing happens with beer snobs. Any type of alcohol snob that there is, they exist, right? And I think the best advice I've ever heard is drink what you like. I mean, as long as you like it, that's good. Doesn't matter really kind of how expensive it is or the cachet that go around it. If you find something you like, go for it, right? And then if you're looking to expand your palate, maybe try other things, and at least you start to learn what are some of the flavors or textures that you don't like in some of these other areas. And if you find something you do like, chances are that there are similar styles that maybe you might be interested in branching out and finding out. It's very much like music in my mind. It's, hey, you know what? I really like, glam rock. And we had Eric Anderson on a few weeks ago, and he mentioned the Struts. And I've been on a Struts kick for the last month, and forgot a little bit how awesome they were. So I think the same thing can happen in when you're sampling different things, whether it's an alcohol or food or whatever it may be. So I think it's always interesting kind of hear about it.
Speaking of snobbery, I mean, coffee snob, that's a thing I dabbled in for a while. And, the most expensive and elite coffee is one where there's an animal that eats the coffee beans and then poops them out. And then that excrement becomes the coffee bean that gets used. Now, I've never had it. It might be the best coffee in the world. But when I heard that story, I had zero interest in trying it.
I have heard of this. I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's called Civet or something like that. Kopi, where it's like koalas or somebody eat it, and then it comes out the other end, and now people are drinking it. It is always amazing to me what the human race will find to consume, and what some people find as delicacies versus maybe things that might be considered weird in different parts of the world, right? I mean, it's just interesting from an observation standpoint.
Yeah, well, I just looked it up. It's Kopi Luwak. My Google skills are awesome. I looked out pooped out coffee beans.
I'm sure they've got the SEO market on that one.
What do you think, Gal? Are you going to drink a big cup of that tomorrow?
Nah, not for me. But I'm wondering, how did the first person try that?
That is an origin story that I would definitely like to understand. Is all right. What's going on, man? How did you come up with this idea? Maybe he was in the bottle of whiskey or something like that, and that's what caused it to go off wires. All right, we definitely went on a little bit of tangent there, but definitely I think mission accomplished about ending on a little bit on a lighter note. Gal, thank you so much for joining us. But before we let you go and let our audience go, any final words of wisdom that folks listening can take away and be part of this journey as part of either cloud identity or identity first security?
The wisest thing I have to say is you have to architect your security from the inside out. Things from the assets outside. And this begins with getting the authorization right, getting the identity right, and only afterwards looking at the network.
Yeah, don't assume, right, that the environment is safe. I guess that's really kind of one of the mantras, right, is zero trust, and this CARDA model that Gartner has been putting out there. Jim, how about yourself? Words of wisdom.
Words of wisdom, and I think it's a little unrelated to what we talked about today, but I think it's about having a great inventory to start. Really knowing what are the assets that you have to protect. It's so impossible when you're starting at a point where it's like you don't even have a list of your applications. It makes it really hard to be thinking about something like zero trust. So I think if you don't have that already, if your organization doesn't have that, I don't think it's the IAM department's responsibility to put together a CMDB. darn it, if nobody else is going to do it, get it done.
Sheer will and effort. Heroics, as always, on the IAM side of things, as I like to say. All right, well, that's a pretty good spot that we'll probably leave it for this week. We'll have some show notes and links that people can check out Authomize at. Again, it's AUTHOMIZE.com. And you can also connect with Gal on LinkedIn. We'll have a link to his LinkedIn profile, and I'm sure he's always happy to introduce and meet new faces, as well as Jim and myself, right? We're always happy to connect with folks online and learn more about what people are doing out in the world and take notes for future shows and things like that. So with that, we'll go ahead and call it for this week. You can visit the show at identityatthecenter.com on the web, and you can also follow us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. And hopefully people will enjoy Identiverse this week, and we'll talk with you all in the next one. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.